Stop me if you've heard this one before. One Piece is a pretty good series. First debuting in 1997 in Weekly Shonen Jump, Eiichiro Oda's silly pirate adventure story One Piece almost immediately rocketed to the top of the manga world, where it has remained unchallenged for over a quarter of a century. To call it a cultural monolith would be to severely understate its popularity and influence. In Japan, anyways. It took a while for it to really find its sea legs in the English-speaking world for, a variety of reasons. Nevertheless, it has continued to grow in popularity globally, and it's going to be my focus here for the next few months. Now, as I'm about to cover such a massive and beloved series, let me start with a few disclaimers. One, I will be talking exclusively about the One Piece manga. I've watched the One Piece anime, I don't really like the One Piece anime, and I might get into more detail about that in the future, but for now the focus will be the manga. Two, for those familiar with my content specifically, expect this series to be more of a general overview than a chapter-by-chapter deep dive. Even just covering the East Blue Saga, it would take me the better part of a year to finish if I did one chapter per video, and I'm not ready to dedicate that kind of time at this point. And three, I have been a weekly reader for several years now, and I will try my best to keep the videos spoiler-friendly, but this is an old and popular series, so watch at your own peril. If you're especially worried, just read the whole series and then come back and watch my videos. So with all that out of the way, come aboard and bring along all your hopes and dreams as we dive into the wild and wacky world of One Piece. Before we can talk properly about One Piece, we need to briefly discuss Romance Dawn. Since he was a junior high student, Eiichiro Oda has been sketching out ideas for a grand romantic pirate adventure manga. Romantic in the classical sense, that is, storytelling focused on grand spectacle and grander emotions. The working title for this pirate manga was Romance Dawn, and in the year leading up to the publication of One Piece, Weekly Shonen Jump published two separate one-shots written by Oda under that title. And it's plain to see when you read them that Oda has always had a clear vision of the kind of story he wanted to tell, with most of the concepts present in these prototypes making their way into the final version. But there were a few key changes in Romance Dawn version 3 that made the story truly ready for serialization. First was the abandoning of the concept of peacemains and morganeers, essentially nice guy pirates and bad guy pirates respectively. The idea of there being a right and wrong way to do piracy is still a central theme in One Piece, but it's explored with a much greater degree of subtlety than separating them into two discrete camps. Second, and much more importantly, was the creation of the now titular One Piece, the legendary treasure of the Pirate King Gold Roger. Creating a central goal that all the pirates of the world are gunning for shifted the trajectory of the series from a light and breezy pirate adventure to the story of the rise of the future Pirate King, Monkey D. Luffy. Like all great stories, One Piece is at its core a story about characters and their relationships, and one of the most important relationships in One Piece is that between Luffy and Shanks. Asterisk, Luffy and Shanks have not interacted directly since Chapter 1. But what makes Shanks and his promise with Luffy so impactful is that in spite of their limited time together, Shanks has absolute faith that Luffy will one day surpass him, and he's willing to go to incredible lengths to guarantee that future. Oda sets us up in the first chapter to think that Shanks is kind of a deadbeat. He and his crew waste their time ashore drinking and teasing Luffy, Shanks in particular seeming to really enjoy antagonizing him, in spite of Ben Beckman's insistence that he's actually looking out for Luffy's best interests. Based on their early interactions, you could be excused for thinking that Luffy's admiration of Shanks is one-sided, but then when Luffy is in actual danger from Higuma, Shanks drops his carefree demeanor, revealing that he thinks of Luffy as a true friend, and he's willing to fight anyone who would try to hurt him. Shanks losing his arm to protect Luffy recontextualizes all of the torment he inflicts as tough love to help Luffy learn that even if he has the potential for greatness, it's not his time to head out to sea just yet. And once he realizes that Luffy understands the lesson he's been trying to teach, he entrusts Luffy with his hat as a symbol of their friendship and the promise to become strong. One of Oda's preferred templates for writing conflict has three main components. One party which represents a positive ideal, typically Luffy and his crew, one which represents a negative ideal, and a spectator who is in some way torn between the two. We saw it in Chapter 1 with Shanks, Higuma, and Luffy, and we can see it again with Luffy, Alvida, and Kobe. And Oda's particular style with this setup is that, especially in East Blue, we're never really meant to believe that Luffy can fail, so the tension and emotional payoff of the conflict is from the spectator identifying and overcoming their limitations. Now, that's not to say that Luffy never struggles in fights or faces personal setbacks, but that on a broad level, he has the will and strength to accomplish anything. So his role in the story is really to inspire those who have lost the will to fight and then be the man to turn their dreams into reality. A clear example of this being that Luffy only fights Alvida after Kobe stands up to her. The East Blue Saga, the first 100 chapters of the story, act as a prologue to One Piece, telling the story of how Luffy conquered his home region by taking down rival pirate captains and gathering loyal crew members before truly beginning his adventure in the Grand Line. Each of the crew members gained in this portion of the series highlights one of the qualities that makes Luffy a deserving captain, and the quality that Zoro represents is ambition. Luffy and Zoro both made promises to a friend that they would one day stand at the top of the world, overcoming all pretenders to the throne, and Oda frames both these promises with a sense of inevitability. Whether it's King of the Pirates or World's Strongest Swordsman, the word want has no place in their vocabularies. Luffy and Zoro intend to achieve their dreams to the extent that second place isn't even an option. And this mutual ambition culminates in one of my favorite character interactions in the whole series, when Zoro tells Luffy how seriously he takes his dream, and Luffy responds, "Of course, anything less would make me look bad." When you make your main character a criminal, the inevitable question you'll run into as a writer is, how does law enforcement fit into my story? And while I wouldn't say that Oda has an unequivocal ACAB framework in One Piece, it's clear that to him, hardline legalism is just as bad as, if not worse than, the wanton destruction that unchecked piracy would threaten. And don't worry, I'm not making One Piece political. A story where government officials gain command positions through dubious means and wield absolute authoritarian power which can only be challenged by violent rebellion has absolutely no relevance to any real-life politics. And the fact that the saviors of Shellstown are ousted by the Marines, whose hands are tied because they are ultimately beholden to a higher, even more authoritarian world power, is just fun fantasy world building, completely detached from any global system of capitalist oligarchs that control the means of production and crush our ability to organize as a united working class. Don't be silly. With the introduction of Nami, the Orangetown arc really shows One Piece's Dragon Ball DNA, her dynamic with Luffy being incredibly reminiscent of Bulma and Goku. But not satisfied to simply copy the work of his predecessor, Oda made the bold artistic innovation of actually having Nami be a sympathetic and complex character. Where Bulma is entirely selfish in early portions of Dragon Ball, we get the idea immediately that Nami is carrying some great burden, and her cold pragmatism is a defense mechanism she had to develop in order to survive, not a reflection of her actual moral character. And we'll dig into that with more detail in the future, but suffice it to say for now that Nami, like Luffy, is a fundamentally kind character, if a bit self-centered. Regardless of what story we're talking about though, I love the setup of a cunning trickster trying to take advantage of a pure of heart, dumb of ass MC, only for said MC to be so unbelievably strong and innocent that they end up being able to save the day without ever realizing that they got played. Gotta be my favorite gag to use with these character archetypes. Do you think Buggy specifically searched for circus-themed crewmates, or did he meet Moji and Kabaji first and then force them to fit his gimmick? In the same way that the 4 East Blue Straw Hats highlight all of Luffy's best qualities, the 4 East Blue pirate rivals, sorry Alvida, provide contrast to show what separates Luffy from your garden variety seafaring plunderer, and the biggest difference between Luffy and Buggy is how they think about treasure. Well, their biggest difference is overall competence, but the treasure thing is a close second. Buggy's primary goal in life is to have lots and lots of treasure in the narrow sense of the word, jewels, doubloons, and what have you, with little regard for sentimental value. On the other hand, as cheesy as it might be to say, Luffy's real treasure is the friends he makes along the way. Like most other pirates, he's searching for the One Piece, but it's not because he desires material wealth, it's because he dreams of exploring the world and building relationships with all kinds of people, and becoming the Pirate King is just the best way he can find to do that. So now that Buggy's here, it's time for a quick primer on Devil Fruits. Devil Fruits are the primary magic system of One Piece. Eating a fruit grants you a one-of-a-kind power, you can only have one fruit, and eating it makes you completely lose the ability to swim. There are more intricacies with them as the story goes on, but those are the basics, and Oda's main concern when coming up with new fruit abilities is how interesting they are to draw. Anything Oda might lack in terms of tactical fight choreography, he more than makes up for with creativity in the kinds of powers he Luffy introduces and the way the characters use their powers. Luffy's Gum Gum powers are the perfect example. His stretchiness is used for all kinds of unique forced perspective action shots and creative finishing moves, as well as ridiculous gags. And Buggy's Chop Chop powers are much the same. At least in his first appearance, his fruit makes him the perfect blend of menacing and ridiculous, with his two best moments being Mini Buggy and the disembodied crotch kick. Viewers from my Avatar The Last Airbender deep dive will know all about the paradox of stakes, the idea that objectively larger conflicts feel far less significant to the audience than conflicts that are personally significant to our main characters. And one Mr. Monkey D. Luffy is kind of the perfect example of this paradox in effect. Luffy has a very specific and well-defined moral code, but as a rule he doesn't hold others to his own standards. While he doesn't personally choose to pillage and destroy random towns, he doesn't really care about Buggy doing it to Orange Town since it has nothing to do with him. But after meeting Mayor Boodle and Shushu and learning what makes Orange Town so precious to them, Luffy is immediately ready to jump into action. And this basic rule is true throughout all of One Piece. Luffy doesn't care about political corruption or the havoc wreaked by rival pirates, he cares about his friends, and he's willing to put his life on the line to protect their dreams. At 1,093 chapters and counting, it's no secret that One Piece is an exceptionally long series, but when I wonder whether all the time I've invested into it is worth it, I think about Gaimon. In a lot of ways, reading such a long, ongoing story is like guarding a treasure for 20 years, even as there's a chance, however small, that you'll find out someday that it was an empty promise. And listen, I'm not saying that Oda is going to let us down with the ending of One Piece, but I would challenge you to imagine the worst, most unsatisfying ending possible, and then ask yourself, would that make the journey less meaningful? Because when I think about the years I've spent reading the story and seeing fan-made content and engaging in the communities we've built around One Piece, I don't think there's any end to the story that could make me feel like the time was wasted. Like Gaimon, if I learn that the treasure chests are empty when the story ends in 50 years, I'll still be more than satisfied to live among all the interesting creatures I've met along the way. The biggest trait shared between Luffy and Usopp is bravery. Okay, hear me out. Usopp is written from the ground up to be the polar opposite of Luffy. Usopp is a liar, Luffy is honest to a fault. Usopp uses a ranged weapon and his ingenuity to fight, Luffy is a melee brawler with incredible brute strength, and Usopp is a coward while Luffy is a brave warrior of the seas. But while on paper they couldn't be any more different, they are also of the same mind in their love of piracy and their desire to protect their friends. For Luffy, these are a simple matter. He's going to become the Pirate King, so he naturally possesses extreme determination and strength of will, but Usopp as a character is defined by a consistent need to overcome his weakness. And like so many people who are much smarter than me have said, true bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to fight in spite of that fear, and when it's do or die time and his friends' dreams are at stake, Usopp always makes the choice to swallow his fear and stand and fight. I've seen a fair amount of One Piece fans criticize the Syrup Village arc on the basis of Kuro's plan being overly complicated, and yeah? The point of Kuro's character is that he's very intelligent, but in the way that those ridiculous life hack videos to sneak cheat sheets into your exams are intelligent. Yeah, you could do all that, but it would be faster and easier to just study. Luffy, meanwhile, is the type of guy who would rather fail an exam than pass through illicit means, and by exam I mean become Pirate King, and by fail I mean die. To Luffy, any shortcut, any half-victory, any deviation from the goal of finding the One Piece is a betrayal of what it means to be a pirate, and a person like Kuro, who wants all of the wealth and comfort of life without any of the hardship, doesn't deserve to be spoken of in the same breath as a person like Luffy. For as superior as Kuro believes himself to be, he could never understand what it means to deserve to stand at the top of the world. The conclusion of the Syrup Village arc hammers in the most important aspect of One Piece's emphasis on dreams, which is that how you go about achieving your dream is far more important than the dream itself. The Syrup Village residents and Captain Kuro both dream of a quiet, peaceful civilian life, but where Kuro is framed as a cowardly villain for his use of deception and violence, Kaya and the Usopp pirates are valorized almost to the same level as the Straw Hats because they intend to achieve their dreams through honest work and mutual support with their community. One Piece challenges its audience to dream big and actively shape their own destiny, but even though most of us aren't going to become majorly important world figures like the Straw Hats, chasing a dream like owning a tavern tavern or becoming a doctor can be just as admirable as long as you do it the right way and earn it for yourself. I've gone on record saying that I'm not the biggest fan of the One Piece anime, and while certainly the anime has developed some major issues over time, to me, One Piece was always a story that was particularly well suited to the medium of manga, and Oda is a mangaka who knows how to make the most out of all of the medium's unique strengths, and the best example of this is cover stories. For those not in the know, Oda periodically uses the cover pages of his chapters to tell short stories about minor characters after their initial encounters with the Straw Hats. Most cover pages are just non-canon bonus art, but the serialized cover stories are fully canon and usually end up intersecting back with the main story down the line, and this is something that just doesn't translate well into an anime adaptation. Turning them into full episodes on their own ends up feeling disjointed and throws off the pacing of the main story. Relegating them to flashbacks when they become relevant makes them seem like half-assed justifications for bringing back old characters, and omitting them entirely just leaves the audience confused when suddenly old antagonists become friendly with the Straw Hats. Far be it from me to defend Toei for any reason, but there really isn't anything they could do to make them feel as natural and unobtrusive as they are in the manga. And if you, dear viewer, happen to be an anime only, you definitely owe it to yourself to look them up and read them for yourself. The One Piece wiki has a good list with relevant details. So I use the Viz translation for my videos since it's the most convenient for me to get relevant screenshots, but it comes with the unfortunate baggage of Zoro being Zolo and Sanji saying crap even though having a potty mouth is a big part of his character. Hashtag let Sanji say shit 2023. Anyways, Sanji's introduction really brings the whole crew dynamic together, and the scene of the Straw Hats eating at Baratie absolutely oozes charm with tons of gags and great character interactions. Sanji flipping back and forth between flirting with Nami and bickering with Usopp, and Usopp trying to rope Zoro into a fight with Sanji will always be a highlight, but my favorite gag is Luffy putting a booger in Zoro's drink and Zoro feeding it back to him. It's a gag that lands especially well when you're reading a physical copy of the manga because the punchline's delivery is timed out with a page turn, which is, again, really difficult to replicate in animation or even digital manga reading. I absolutely understand that cost is a barrier, but if you're a longtime One Piece fan and you've never experienced reading a physical manga volume, try checking your local library. You might be surprised what they have, and I can't recommend the experience enough. One of Oda's best qualities as a writer is that he likes to take the positive ideals in his story and push them to their logical extreme to examine how they can become toxic and destructive when applied uncritically, and the Baratie arc does this with loyalty. Gin is consistently praised by the Krieg pirates for how loyal he is to his captain and crew, making himself a decoy to allow the others to escape from the Marines and mercilessly executing even the most cruel orders from his captain. But unlike the Straw Hats, where the crew are all willing to risk their lives for each other, Gin's loyalty to Krieg is entirely one-sided. Krieg views Gin as a tool and immediately orders him to die once he's outlived his usefulness, and the saddest part is that even knowing how expendable he is to Krieg, he can't find it in himself to disobey his captain. It's almost framed like an addiction or an abusive relationship. A less obvious example of the dark side of loyalty is Sanji and Zeph. The two of them have mutual love and respect for each other, but Sanji feeling indebted to Zeph has caused him to stagnate. Meanwhile, the only repayment Zeph ever wanted was for Sanji to chase after the All Blue for the both of them, and he knew that staying at the Baratie any longer would only hold Sanji back from his true potential. I've had commenters get on my case in the past for using imprecise definitions of philosophical terms, so when I say that Sanji and Luffy share the trait of chivalry, just understand that 1, I'm trying to do an alphabet thing with the Straw Hat traits, and 2, I don't mean that Sanji and Luffy are medieval knights, I mean they have strict codes of honor that they will always follow, even and especially if it makes their lives significantly more difficult. Sanji says this directly. He knows that feeding the Krieg pirates will possibly result in his death or the destruction of Baratie, but having experienced starvation himself, he would never allow another person to die of hunger. That's his burden as a chef. Whether he lets them live after they're fed, well, that's another matter entirely. And while Luffy doesn't necessarily believe in going out of his way to help everybody he meets, the two things he absolutely will not abide are his friends getting hurt and a challenge to his dream of becoming king of the pirates, which to him necessarily includes anybody else claiming that they will find the One Piece. Sure, he also makes a deal with Zeph to fight Krieg instead of touring for a year, but the fight is primarily a matter of pride because his burden as captain is to be so uncompromising in his dreams that nobody would ever dare challenge him. Gum Gum Giant Gavel is Luffy's best finishing move. I will not be taking questions at this time. The most telling moment for Don Krieg's character is his insistence that Mihawk must have used a devil fruit power to destroy his ship, because it cements his belief that strength exists externally for those who are strong. Whether it's his arsenal of weapons, his fleet of soldiers, or even his desire for Zeph's logbook, Don Krieg believes that strength and success is a matter of having the right tools. But in the One Piece world, true strength is entirely internal and only achievable by those who have the will to obtain it for themselves. Sure, Luffy has a devil fruit, but it's not like some fruits we see later on that are just video game power-ups. Even with spoiler developments, Luffy is framed in the story as being strong in spite of the Gum Gum fruit, or at least completely independent of it. Krieg's refusal to believe that Mihawk could just be that strong is what caps his growth as a pirate, but Luffy's refusal to believe in his own limitations is what makes his potential for growth limitless. A trick that Oda likes to use to introduce important characters is to draw them essentially spilling out of their panels, as if they can't be contained by the lines he's drawn around them. And this is combined with dynamic, expressive posing to showcase their personalities, and it gives all of the characters a larger-than-life feeling the first time we see them, signaling who we really need to pay attention to. Mihawk is the first character to be introduced with a full page, but his subdued, almost unnervingly still pose creates the impression that he is choosing to limit himself to only one page. This is how you introduce a top-tier character. And yeah, this kind of paneling doesn't translate well to an anime adaptation, take a shot everybody, but the lesson here is that when you want to make a character entrance really pop, you need to first set audience expectations for how your story works, and then use your chosen character to shatter them entirely. Zoro vs. Mihawk sits at an interesting point in the narrative, because East Blue is defined by Luffy and the Straw Hats effortlessly sweeping through all of their antagonists before facing real challenges in the Grand Line. So having the second strongest member of the crew suffer a catastrophic defeat feels like it should be a demoralizing reality check, that Zoro was just a big fish in a small pond. But instead, his loss is framed triumphantly, because the fight was never about whether Zoro could defeat Mihawk, it was about whether he had the resilience to face certain death without flinching, because that's the quality which will allow him to eventually surpass Mihawk. And Mihawk's acknowledgement of Zoro really rounds out his characterization. You get the idea from his interactions with the Krieg pirates that he's become bored as the world's strongest, and he's given up any hope of finding a worthy rival. But when Zoro offers him the final blow, his expression looks like he can barely hold back his excitement, because even though his wait isn't over, he knows it will be soon. Chapter 69, Nice, is the first real example of what would become the defining quality of Oda's world-building, which is casually name-dropping characters and locations that won't be fully paid off for over a decade. Small additions like the first mention of Jinbei and Paradise as a nickname for the Grand Line give Oda a reputation as a master of planning and foreshadowing, and while that reputation is largely well-earned, the real quality that's allowed him to extend the story of One Piece the way he has is his ability to make unplanned additions to the story feel natural, a famous example being the existence of the 7 warlords. With how important they are to One Piece, you could be excused for thinking that Oda had always planned for the warlords to be a part of the series, but he officially revealed in 2017 that he basically added them on a whim because they were too badass to not include, and 7 was the coolest sounding number. So the best advice I can give you from One Piece's world building is not to meticulously plan out everything from the beginning, it's to avoid committing to hard details for as long as possible, because you may just lock yourself out from an even better idea you'll have down the line. Piggybacking off of the previous video, Nami's betrayal at the Baratier is the first real payoff of One Piece's foreshadowing, assuming you can call Nami directly looking at the reader and saying, "I am going to betray Luffy," foreshadowing. Regardless, her departure from the seafaring restaurant reminds any readers who may have forgotten that her alliance with the Straw Hats was always meant to be temporary. But this moment and her return home showcase Oda's mastery of what I like to call the double reveal, where in the same breath as revealing the answers to our longest held questions, will Nami actually betray Luffy, he gives us just enough new information to immediately have a dozen more questions. What's Nami's connection to Arlong? Why does she drive Chabo away while also giving him a wad of cash? And who is Bellemere? But all of these and more will be answered in the climactic finale of the East Blue Saga and the first truly peak arc of One Piece, Arlong Park. Arlong Park, as the first arc to feature all of the East Blue Straw Hats as members of the crew, sets the standard roles that each of the members will fulfill in a given arc. And these aren't hard and fast roles with no room for deviation, they're more like general guidelines of the kind of roles you can expect each character to perform throughout One Piece. Zoro is the most consistent fighter on the crew. He's not as strong as Luffy, power scalers, keep scrolling, but he doesn't have the same habit of getting himself incapacitated right before the final battle, so he's typically the one leading the charge and clearing out the fodder, leaving the strongest opponent for Luffy once he's done getting stuck in or under some kind of obstacle. He's also the emotional rock of the crew, helping rein in the more hot-headed tendencies of the other Straw Hats. He can definitely be as reckless as Luffy, but he's the least likely to get personally invested in the conflict of an arc, so he can stay calm and help the others work through their feelings while they decide their next steps. It's been memed to death that Sanji is ridiculously strong for having a dream that has absolutely nothing to do with combat, and on a character level, I would say that Sanji is strong because of his upbringing and so that he can prove the haters wrong, but on a writing level, Sanji is strong because Oda needed a third main combatant for the Straw Hats. Specifically, he needed a combat-oriented character who he could use for more subtle tactical side quests to contrast Luffy and Zoro's run-straight-at-the-enemy fighting style. And that's not to say that Luffy and Zoro never have their own side adventures, but where they would get lost or distracted from the main mission, Sanji has the presence of mind to make an intentional choice to break off from the main party and secure an objective that will be helpful later, like diving into the water to free Luffy or bullying Momu. In future arcs, Sanji side quests typically happen before the final battle starts, but Arlong Park is such a relatively short arc that there isn't as much space for it earlier on. Usopp is my favorite character in One Piece, and one of the things I love most about him is how versatile he is from a writing perspective. He's ostensibly one of the main fighters of the Straw Hats, and he typically gets a 1v1 fight in larger arcs, but he's also the physically weakest member of the crew, so he's often relegated to a more supportive role in combat. He's the second smartest member of the East Blue Five after Nami, which makes him perfect for a scouting role, gathering information about important people and locations when the crew reaches a new island. And most importantly, he's the objectively funniest member of the crew, and it's always a treat seeing the ridiculous faces and poses that Oda comes up with for him and his big nose. I'll admit that most of his best character moments are later into the series, and a lot of readers really don't like him early on, but I personally can't get enough of the guy. He's the jack of all trades that the Straw Hat crew needs. Usopp Rubber Band of Doom solo's your favorite series, fight me. Towards the end of Dragon Ball's run, the series became structured more and more around the wait for Goku, where the supporting characters hold out against the big villain for as long as possible until Goku can swoop in and secure the dub. And Luffy is a very similar kind of force of nature MC whose main job in an arc is to fight the final boss once everyone else has been cleared out. And to be clear, I like Goku, and I think he and Dragon Ball are often unfairly maligned in the public consciousness, but One Piece elevates this archetype by giving it a new emotional context. Oda hammers in from Chapter 2 how helpless Luffy is on his own and how important finding a crew will be in order for him to survive on the sea. And his speech to Arlong reveals that he's completely self-aware about his limitations, but rather than become self-conscious and worry about becoming a burden to his crew, he doubles down on the one thing he knows for a fact that he can do, knowing that his friends will, in return, take care of everything else. And it's this unwavering confidence in himself that defines Luffy as a captain and makes him the perfect foundation on which to build the Straw Hat crew. The term ride or die could easily be applied to any member of the Straw Hats, their found family dynamic being a big part of what makes the crew so lovable, but the two members who embody devotion the most are Luffy and Nami. Nami is initially framed as entirely self-centered, only interested in making money and willing to throw Luffy under the bus for the sake of short-term gains, and even as she starts to respect him during their travels, she still keeps him and the rest of the crew at arm's length because she needed to stay focused on her real goal of buying Kokoyashi Village back from Arlong. And the fact that she spent 8 years working for Arlong and stealing from pirates for the sake of the villagers' freedom is proof enough of her selflessness and devotion, but it's after Nezumi steals her earnings that shows the full extent of her strength of will, when she doesn't skip a beat before deciding to start from scratch and try again. And Do I even need to explain Luffy on this one? He's not king of the pirates, he's king of butting into other people's business and solving all of their problems at great personal risk with zero hesitation. As for how Nami actually functions in the crew, she's realistically more of a captain to the Straw Hats than Luffy, at least in terms of the responsibilities you would expect from a real-life ship's captain. She literally directs the ship in her role as navigator, but she also takes care of all of the practical, day-to-day decision-making that Luffy is neither qualified for nor interested in, including but not limited to finding a proper ship in Syrup Village, recruiting a chef at Baratier, and staying apprised of world events. But on the whole, she's more of a foil for Zoro than she is for Luffy, being the least combat-focused crewmate and the most likely to get emotionally invested in the conflict of a given arc. She and Zoro essentially share vice captain duties, with Nami being sensible and compassionate and Zoro being steadfast and ambitious, and they both help steer Luffy in the right direction depending on the kind of support he needs at the time. And to be completely candid for a moment, I will never forgive the editors at Shueisha for depriving us of Cyborg Battle Axe Nami, but I do still absolutely love her as a character. It would be hard for me to pick a favorite moment in any arc of One Piece, let alone one as jam-packed with amazing writing as Arlong Park. But at the same time, there's really only one choice, and it's Luffy giving his hat to Nami. It's really such a simple, symbolic gesture, but it hits so hard every time I read it because of everything building up to it. Of course, there's the personal significance of the hat to Luffy. It represents his friendship with Shanks and their promise to meet again in the future, and there are tons of instances where we're shown him being fiercely protective of it. But the key point that really makes this scene work is the fact that Luffy's gone out of his way multiple times to avoid learning about Nami's past. At this moment, he had no real reason to believe that she had a good reason for stealing the Going Merry or hiding her affiliation with Arlong, but because of who Luffy is, he knew her well enough to understand that she would never actually betray him, and he wasn't going to let her go, even if she felt like she didn't deserve his help. So him giving her his hat is him saying all at once, anything from your past or any wrong you've committed against me doesn't matter. You are my treasure, and I'm going to protect you. And there's really nothing revolutionary about it, it's just a basic usage of the internal symbolism of the series, but it's a testament to how impactful storytelling can be when you understand how to use the fundamentals. So it's high time we actually talk about the fish man of the fish hour, Arlong. One of the core ideas that gets explored in One Piece is freedom, with Luffy representing what it means to be truly free, so naturally most of his biggest villains will represent the opposite of freedom. And Arlong is essentially a proto-emperor of the East Blue, trying to claim it as his territory and rule with an iron fist, oppressing all of the humans who live there in the process. And the inherent awkwardness of magical fantasy racism aside, it's Arlong's belief that the strong have the right to subjugate the weak that separates him from Luffy. Luffy is specifically not a hero, and I don't think he'd ever vocalize the belief that the strong always have a responsibility to protect the weak, but it's obvious that to him, being free also necessitates defending and restoring freedom for those who can't defend it themselves. Also, his fight against Arlong kickstarts the trend of Luffy accomplishing some secondary task at the same time as defeating the villain, with his Gum Gum Battle Axe tearing down Arlong Park, literally smashing the tools of oppression that Arlong used against Nami. Spoilers for Chapter 600 of One Piece. To recap, the four main East Blue pirate captains represent desiring wealth for its own sake, using deception to avoid hard work, relying on weapons for strength, and restricting the freedoms of others. And all of the main villains of One Piece exhibit one or several of these traits on some level, but by combining all of them, we can imagine an anti-Luffy, an ultimate pirate rival for him to face off against and show that he is the true pirate king. Somebody who isn't afraid to take shortcuts or sell out people who considered him a friend. Somebody whose only real claim to power is an inherently strong devil fruit. Somebody who is seemingly only interested in getting what he wants no matter how many people get hurt. Yeah, I can't think of anyone either. To be fair, we don't know all the details of Blackbeard's endgame yet, and he may turn out to be more sympathetic than we expect. But it seems clear that Oda is using him to represent all of the evils in the world of piracy, evils which he made a point of exploring from the very beginning of the series. As we begin to close out our time here with East Blue, it's worth mentioning that Logtown is a famously shortened arc on account of Oda wanting the crew to be officially heading for the Grand Line by chapter 100. And I'll give the anime a little bit of credit here for fleshing out the arc with a few semi-canon scenes like Usopp's sniper duel, but even without the anime additions, Logtown is a first-of-its-kind arc in One Piece. And it's the kind of arc that One Piece would eventually become known for, where Oda takes the time to slow things down and do some world building after the climax of a major saga. It wouldn't be hyperbolic to say that a large number of fans look forward to these post-arc lore dumps more than the actual conclusions of arcs, because they remind us that as much as One Piece is Luffy's story, he's ultimately just one person in a living, breathing world with no shortage of major players. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons for One Piece's immense staying power. We, the audience, are always aware on some level that the world isn't just waiting in stasis for Luffy to show up and get things rolling. Everything is already in motion, and Luffy is just one piece of the puzzle. Bounties represent the best of what One Piece's world building has to offer. Early on, they're ostensibly meant to be a corollary to DBZ power levels, with a higher bounty meaning a higher overall threat level, and like power levels, the audience is made to understand early on that we shouldn't necessarily trust the numbers we're given. By beating all of the rival pirate captains, Luffy decisively proved that he is the strongest in the East, so it makes a certain sense that his power level would be higher than the others. But when you read the Marines' dialogue, they talk about Buggy, Krieg, and Arlong being major problems for their branch units, and implicitly that Luffy taking them down did a lot for the health and safety of the general public. Realistically, Luffy didn't conquer East Blue, he liberated it, and in a just world he would be hailed as a hero. But because he did it while waving a pirate flag, he's branded as a dangerous criminal. Because what bounties represent aren't a pirate's threat level to the world as a whole, it's their threat level to the world government specifically, and that distinction is what makes bounties so important and interesting in One Piece. Moderate general One Piece spoiler warning. In light of everything that we've seen from the Marines so far, Smoker's introduction is absolutely brilliant. His reactions to dropping his stone stack and ruining the ice cream cone are clear subversions of what we might expect from a Marine captain. Where Morgan or Nezumi would lash out at their subordinates and terrorize civilians, Smoker takes full responsibility for the fumbles, even paying to replace the ice cream that his pants ate. And these reactions parallel him most closely with Shanks in Chapter 1. Coupled with his complete lack of deference to the authority of Marine hierarchy, he's really set up to be the perfect Marine rival for Luffy. There's even the fact that his second-in-command has a relationship with Luffy's second-in-command, and that might matter someday. Yeah, all of this is great on paper, and I do still have high hopes for Smoker as a character, but it's seeming less and less likely that this dynamic will be particularly relevant in the One Piece endgame, simply because the power scaling in One Piece has outgrown Smoker as a realistic threat to the Straw Hats. But, as they say, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em? I've heaped plenty of praise on One Piece, and there's a lot more that I could talk about that I enjoy but haven't mentioned in a video, but it's important to me that I spend at least a little bit of time criticizing what I see as genuine flaws in the series, so this video is that. First is a smaller technical complaint. Oda is good at coming up with big action set pieces and cool moments, but he can really struggle with moment-to-moment fight choreography, and a lot of the action-centric chapters can come off cluttered and messy, especially early on. But secondly, and much more importantly, is the much bigger systemic issue that is good old-fashioned shonen sexism. The main way that it manifests in One Piece is with female character designs, or I should say, female character design, where the overwhelming majority of women in One Piece have the same ultra-busty hourglass body shape, and the ones that don't are either joke characters or villains. And there are exceptions, of course, but this really isn't even something that Oda tries to hide. He's literally drawn a how-to diagram in an SBS corner, and it's just a real shame, because he can make incredible character designs for all genders when he puts in the effort, but instead he just makes different costumes for the same copy and paste Barbie doll body that he came up with in his 20s. The writing in One Piece also has its share of cultural misogynistic baggage, but on the whole, Oda is at least much better than a lot of his contemporaries at writing rounded, complex women characters, even if you wouldn't think it from the art. Now we reach the ultimate question. The question this TikTok series has been leading up to: is One Piece worth it? And I've got to be honest, I really can't make that value judgment for you. Reading 1,000+ chapters of manga is a big time commitment any way you slice it, and whether it's worth it or not depends on your tastes and your ability to spend that much time on media consumption. But as a longtime One Piece fan, let me offer 2 pieces of advice for any prospective readers. First, on expectations. One Piece is a massively popular series, and I fear a lot of its fans may give the impression that it's this revolutionary work of fiction that will shatter your expectations of what shonen manga is capable of. But Oda hasn't really done anything to innovate his medium. He's just a master of his craft, delivering consistent, high quality for over 25 years. As an analogy, he's not a molecular gastronomist reimagining the limits of our definitions of food. He's the line cook at your favorite local diner who always cooks the burgers just right. Now, it's not all paint-by-numbers shonen fare, and Oda does plenty to keep the series fresh over time, but One Piece isn't a brand new take on the shonen battle genre. Its greatness lies in its ability to exemplify everything great about the genre. Second, on mindset. Easily the biggest trap new One Piece readers fall into is needing to catch up. And at risk of sounding a bit old man yells at cloud, I can't stand the modern media landscape where we're expected to consume works of art rapidly and move on to the next thing without taking the time to sit with it and be affected by it. I'm certainly guilty of it too, but it's the exact wrong way to approach a story like One Piece, which was written over an incredibly long period of time and really meant to be consumed over a similarly long period of time. Let yourself take time with One Piece. Find a way to fit it into your routine, but never force yourself to engage if you aren't feeling it. If it sucks you in and you read the whole thing in 3 months, that's great. If you watch it on and off for a decade before getting to the end, that's just as good. And if you're looking for a specific point where you have my personal blessing to stop reading, I'm just gonna tell you, Chapter 1, Page 1. Because when something you're supposed to be enjoying starts feeling like an obligation, no amount of pushing through to the next big moment is going to change that. I've been reading One Piece for most of my life, and I look forward to continuing to read it for the foreseeable future. So for me, One Piece is absolutely worth it. But the only person who can answer that question for you is you.